Good afternoon. We will now reconvene the open portion of the public meeting today, and we'll reconvene the meeting. It is 1:01 p.m. We are rising from closed session with a report having a recommendation that needs to be moved by council. That recommendation being that council appoint Doug Wilson to the Municipal Revitalization and Heritage Advisory Committee for the 2022-2026 term of council, and that council support the temporary appointment of Kim Blackwell to the Downtown Millbrook BIA Board of Management during Timmy Brady's absence. Moved by Councilor Byrne, seconded by Councilor Natchoff. All in favor? That is approved. Next on the agenda today, we have we need a resolution to open the public meeting. Moved by Councilor Byrne, seconded by Councilor Natchoff. All in favor? That is approved. Report PEB 2025-13 zoning bylaw amendment. Mr. Wilkinson, over to you, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to members of council and public, before you today is Planning Report PEB 2025-13. The report presents two recommendations. One, that council receive and consider all comments related to zoning bylaw amendment application ZBA-09-24, and that bylaw number 2025-13 be approved to rezone a portion of the subject lands from the agricultural zone to the agricultural exception 19 zone. The owner of 347 Sharp Line wishes to construct an accessory apartment, approximately 185 square meters or 2,000 square feet in size, attached to a 185 square meter, 2,000 square foot accessory building, which will be put on private services within the residential cluster on the subject property. The bylaw states that a maximum of one accessory apartment is permitted per dwelling, provided that a maximum floor area used for the accessory apartment shall not exceed 45% of the gross floor area of the building in which it is located, and the accessory apartment must be located in the main building. The purpose and effect of the zoning bylaw amendment is to rezone a portion of the property which will permit a detached accessory apartment attached to this accessory building. The bylaw will also define residential cluster for this property. Notice of the amendment was circulated by first-class prepaid mail to all assessed persons within 120 meters or 400 feet of the lands, and to all required ministries and agencies and all township department directors. A notice was posted on the Sharp Line frontage of the property, and the notice of the public meeting was posted on the township website. The notice complies with the requirements of the Planning Act. Township staff have not received any comments from the public. Township staff have no objection to the application. Comments from Autonomy Conservation, Canada Post, Enbridge Gas, and Kawartha Pine Ridge District School Board were received for this application, none of which had any objection to the application. The proposed amendments are consistent with applicable policies and regulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. We'll look to council for any questions or comments with regards to this application. Seeing none, we'll now open the meeting to members of the public who wishing to speak to the application. Do we have anyone online this week or no? Okay, good to check. Any members of the public wishing to speak can just move forward to the podium there. Seeing none. Okay, consideration of the report. So there are two recommendations in the report. There doesn't seem to be any issues with this minor adjustment. So we'll look to a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councilor Byrne, second by Deputy Mayor Huntley. All in favor? Those recommendations are approved. Thank you, Matt, for the report. Now we need a resolution to close the public meeting. Moved by Councilor Byrne, seconded by Deputy Mayor Huntley. All in favor? That is approved. Next on the agenda, we have Rob Adams from Town Hall Consulting with regards to the corporate strategic plan. Rob, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Graham. I'm delighted to be here and join all of you today. I just wanted to say at the outset that I've done a lot of strategic plans over the last number of years, and I think you should be extremely proud of the one that you have produced here. Both staff, council, and in particular the public provided a lot of really valuable input into the strategic plan. And I think in the end, you've ended up with a strategic plan which is exceptional and is going to guide you well into the future. The page that's up now really is talking about kind of a friendly welcome to the community, but it focuses on developing the 5-year strategic plan to really position the municipality to help foster growth, but also preserve our heritage. And why now? Well, with all the growth and development that's happening in the municipality, it's critical that Cavan Monaghan be prepared for that growth and development, not only to manage the growth, but also to maintain the existing community character and resources. And to have a good long-term strategic plan is absolutely critical. So we did a number of workshops with council to gain input and with staff to gain input onto what the top priorities might be. If you go to the next page, page 3, there's a message from the mayor, kind of outlines the things that happened. And then on under community engagement, I just wanted to talk about the extent of the engagement that took place. So we did do 2 workshops with council to kind of get a feel for what council was thinking and what staff were thinking. But the critical piece that was really important in this community and is in many communities is to get community engagement. And we did that through a very vigorous and robust process, doing an online survey, and a funded monopoly tool was used to be able to garner feedback from the public. As well, we did an open house monopoly night for residents to come and spend money and invest it on the projects that they saw as the highest priority. And as well, we had 2 focus groups nights with various focus group representatives, members of the public, members of your sports organizations, community leaders, members of other key partners in the community, all attended focus groups to be able to give their input and feedback into the plan. And so it was a real team effort. It was council staff, but it was really a lot of people in the community helping to provide engagement. So very robust engagement. The next piece that I want to go to is on page 5, and that's around the mission, the vision, and the values. And so the mission that was identified was the Township of Cavan Monaghan is committed to delivering responsive and cost-effective services that provide for the economic, social, and environmental well-being of ratepayers now and into the future. And the vision is to be a strong, sustainable rural community where we celebrate, protect, and promote our unique history and natural heritage and value the contribution and interests of all our taxpayers in building a prosperous future. As well, we identified values, and the 3 values, I call them the 3 I's, are inclusivity, innovation, and integrity. And in fact, on our surveys, I think it was over 80% of the public was supportive of the mission, vision, and values that were identified by council and staff. So really good response. The process of going through the strategic planning workshops and gaining the public feedback and understanding from the public what they wanted as the top priorities helped us to identify what are the strategic pillars or the strategic priorities. And the ones that are up on the screen now are the key ones that were identified. Number 1 was fiscal sustainability. Number 2 was community vitality, wanting to have a really vital community. Environmental sustainability was really important to people. Community engagement and communication was another critical element that was identified. Economic development was another key piece that people felt was foundational for the future of the municipality. And finally, customer service, one that council felt strongly about. Staff identified it as an opportunity for wins, and the public embraced it as an opportunity for a key priority area as well. So those areas were outlined. And what we did was we set up objectives under each of those key priorities. So if you go to the next page, it has a financial sustainability, and it lists the objectives. What is the objective we hope to accomplish? but also we set out action items. What are the actions that need to be delivered to be able to get the results we're looking for to achieve the objective? And so just an example on financial sustainability, doing things to expand the assessment base, ensuring that we're doing the asset management planning and continuing to refine the asset management process, reviewing financial management and debt policies, investigating alternatives for funding opportunities and partnerships, looking for things like provincial grants, maintaining, enhancing long-term planning, and maintaining 80% annual contribution target to the asset replacement reserve. And so those were just some. There are a few others that are on the next page, and they included those are the ones around financial sustainability. On the next page are around community vitality. Community vitality, the objectives were to enhance and optimize recreation in the township, develop a downtown park, establish key annual events, festivals, build upon indoor and outdoor space and promote health and wellness, and increase health services, expand or build a new medical center if possible. And finally, to increase housing for seniors. So those were the ones around the importance of community vitality. Around environmental sustainability, the objectives were to promote the preservation and conservation of existing heritage buildings, continue to support and promote the local sustainability initiatives that are already underway, to continue to support the natural heritage system features, enhance reforestation efforts wherever possible. On the next page, integrate environmental sustainability into decision-making processes and work to enhance watershed planning, promote sustainable practices in municipal infrastructure, and explore opportunities for transit and ride-sharing programs. And those were all quite an aggressive list of items, but under environmental, the public had very strong feelings that I think support many of those initiatives that were identified. The fourth area was community engagement, and to be able to build trust in the community and to foster those connections, community engagement is a really important piece that was identified by council and staff, and the public supported that. And so the items identified there were to expand the role of the communications officer to a full-time position, expand and diversify communications channels to ensure residents get access to key information, increase the in-person engagement opportunities within the community, establish wayfinding signage and information systems. And those were kind of the key objectives outlined under that particular item around community engagement. Under economic development, which was a really, really important one, especially if you want to foster a strong growing community, the priority was to try to attract and retain businesses in the community. And so the objectives were to promote industrial commercial development, attract retail businesses and encourage local shopping, strengthen small business community, increase the amount of serviceable land available. There were a few others on the next page, which were to increase flexibility in zoning bylaws for employment lands, to promote innovative farming practices and agricultural opportunities. Certainly, those are in keeping with the natural makeup of the community. It has a long rural tradition. Develop and implement economic development strategy, develop employment lands, and finally, business retention expansion as another key priority. So under economic development, there were quite a few initiatives, lots of work for the economic development officer to look after. Under customer service, which once again, everyone supported as a key priority, try to work to enhance staff retention. And the thought was, and this came up a lot at public meetings even, being able to retain staff and ensure that we retain that tribal knowledge is really, really important. And so making sure that we have a positive work culture and that we're supporting our staff is really important. As well, leveraging technology and being able to use technology to make people's jobs more efficient and more effective in the way they can deliver services. And once again, it benefits customer service. And then hosting staff open houses so that the public who may be new to the community or may not know the staff get an opportunity to meet our staff and make a contact, ask their questions, get to know them. So another really important customer service piece that was identified. And so those were the areas that were identified as key focuses. The implementation of the plan will, once council has approved, we will sit down with your staff and we will work with them on some tools that we have that will help you to manage the strategic plan and the activities going forward. Also, if you're reporting on an annual basis to council, it will be easy for you to do that reporting to council. And that's kind of the next step as implementation starts to take place. Finally, I just wanted to say that it was an absolute pleasure for Emily and I to work on your strategic plan. You have a terrific community who were very engaged. The feedback was very much in sync with what council and staff were thinking. That doesn't always happen. Some clients, we have to come back and tell them they've missed the mark a little bit. They need to make some adjustments. In this case, the adjustments were very minor and we were able to make those in kind of building out the plan. I want to thank you once again. I'm glad to answer any questions that anyone has on it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you to your team for shepherding us through this process like you have. And I think it's been good to see both the engagement from council and that harmony, like you mentioned. Obviously, it's nice to be on the same page rather than in separate books. So that's always a good thing to hear. There's also a report coming forward about this with regards to council as well. But I think Rob's going to stay with us for the consideration of that report. But by all means, questions for Rob with regards to the presentation and strat plan. Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Through you, Chair, more comment than question, Rob, but I think you did a fantastic job on this. It's very easy to read, the flow is fantastic. I think it can be dissected and picked apart pretty fast, find what you need. It's great. I like the simplification of it, and I like the ability that it's referenceable to pretty much anybody who wants to pick it up and read it. So thank you for your efforts.
I have to say it's a team effort and you have fantastic staff here who did an amazing job, and council really set the leadership for this. And then there was good community involvement as well. So team effort is what produces a good result, but thank you very much.
Councilor Nagshaw.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Same as to echo the sentiments of Deputy Mayor Huntley. Very impressed. You guys did great work. It was really really good, engaging experience. And the final product, I'm not even pleasantly surprised. I'm not surprised that you produced a really great document for us to work with, but it's just very encouraging, and just wanted to say thank you.
Other questions? Councilor Byrne.
Through the chair to Rob. So on page 7 of your report, 42 of my handout, I don't know which number you want to go by. And I'm just looking at this, trying to figure out how much of that information, that page there, how much of that information is coming from the hands-on Monopoly night that we held down here at the new center? How much is from the online Monopoly night, which I didn't know anything about until after? And how much came from the online survey to come up with those stat sheets?
A great question, and really glad to help clarify it. So the page that's up there now is from the online funded Monopoly results. So these were the results of what people did online. And Well, the numbers could be, vary a little bit. We kind of put them in buckets, and you can see the gradient on the right-hand side. The further it goes out, the more people were prioritizing that particular item. But those were the ones that were identified during the survey for the Monopoly Night. If you go to the next page, the next page is the open house Monopoly Night, where we had participants participating in the 6 areas where there were pillars, and there were 89 action items in total, and $80 million was spent. These were the top 10 projects that money was put into at that event and for that night. And so then what we did was we kind of took the twos. Both of them were very repetitive, which is good. It means it's supporting it. We took the two and kind of said, is there anything that we're missing? We said, no. The things we're hearing from the public are what council was talking about, what staff was talking about. It makes sense. There's really nothing in there that we missed that we needed to bubble up and say, come back to council and say, hey, I think there's something the public's saying that we weren't thinking about. So both of them were different activities. First one's online, the second one's the actual Monopoly Night. Then there was further feedback that was through the focus groups. There were a couple of nights of focus groups with multiple focus groups, and there was similar feedback that matched with those as well. Oh, there are the open houses and the focus groups. There. Does that help?
Through the chair, back to Rob. Yes, the part that confuses me when I'm reading through this documentation, it looked like 29 people showed up the night down at the big room to do the Monopoly. Some of that was staff, some of them were people that didn't even know about it, but I got talking to them out in the foyer and they went in. If that number, if I'm thinking this through right, roughly 30 people got $5 million each, and there's only 80 million shows up on the final tally. So did people steal your Monopoly money at the end of the night, or how's that all? Because on that night, there was probably close to 10 tables with a lot of gift bags for a lot of different ideas on each table. And I think you mentioned earlier that might have been around 89. I thought it was higher than that. But I'm just wondering how we only ended up with $80 million spent and how that works into your numbers.
Yes, great question, by the way. The Monopoly Night, and I do have to thank you for finding people who are in the arena who were actually encouraged to come in. I know there were a number of people who joined us and really enjoyed the process. To speak to your question around the amount of money, there were some people who didn't spend all their money. They may have said, I've put it on the priorities that I want, and they set it aside. There were a few people who put it on, if you remember, we had an ideas board. Some people put their money on the ideas board on an idea that they wrote down, and we captured that as well. So anywhere that the money was put, we tracked it and were able to account for it.
Yeah, through the chair, back to you again. So that information, all that data, would it be accessible to the public at some point in time if they wanted to go on to this new Connect Cabin Monaghan thing that I registered for? Would they be able to actually see that breakdown to kind of get an idea of what actually happened that night?
I'm not sure that all the actual raw data is still available. I think we put it in the summary sheet that you can see on this report that we provided. But once again, understand that this is a snapshot to give us some feedback to see if we're off, if the plan that we're putting together is missing something. So I'll give you an example. We did one municipality and they didn't have the environment as a priority. And we did a number of public engagements, and we heard from the public that the environment was an important piece and no one was doing anything about it. So we actually went back to the council. We presented our findings that showed that there was a differentiation between where council was at and what we were hearing from the public. And council saw the data and the information and decided to do a new section on the environment for their strategic plan. That's an example of how we might work with the municipality if there was a difference. In this case, I have to congratulate all of you because council and staff really did a good job. Yeah, there were some little tweaks, but there was nothing significant that was missed. The public feedback really helped support the initiatives and the ideas and the issues that council had identified. And that's to your credit.
Thanks, Rob. Another question, Councilor Byrne?
Through the chair back to Rob. So the part that I have a little issue personally is one of the items on the tables for the gift bags was a new medical center, which we did this big hair thing, right? We saw that at the workshop, but it is important to our community. And there's a lot of people that talk to me on that regard. I know I threw my whole 5 million in the bag. That was an $8 million project. I'm just wondering how that sorts out when you're doing all this sifting through the numbers, because I found out since that time, that night, that more than one person actually did the same thing, that was one of their focus points. And I always thought from the onset that we are allowed to spend the money any way we saw fit that night. I just wonder why it makes honorable mention, but it doesn't make the list on anything as far as moving forward with our strategic plan for the community.
Well, just a second, Rob, but just through you, I think, Councilor Byrne, just to draw your attention, so page 22 in the report, or sorry, page 8 in the report. So that's where that's captured. So that's where it's identified as a priority. So is that not significant enough? I'm just sort of curious.
Through the chair, back to the chair. So I'm looking at this data. If somebody glances at it quickly and it's so easy to peruse, they kind of get the idea of where we're heading as the main topics. And I just wondered how that shakes out, because it was something that I didn't understand. First off, the lack of total money being spent that night, just raw numbers, just trying to sort through how things are going, because we have a history here sometimes of doing surveys that the end results don't really reflect what the bulk of the population across the whole township was hoping for. So I'm just trying to make sense of where you got your numbers and how much is related to people who actually live here as compared to somebody that's transient or whatever, because it mentions on your page 5 of your report about the 85% that thought the mission statements were in line with what was going on. But I don't know where that 85 breaks down to. Is that the combination of the online survey, the meetings, the Monopoly night in-house? Like, is that all combined into that group to come up with that final 85% that say we're on track with the policies of the strategic plan?
Great question once again, Councillor. The online survey was where that information is coming from. To answer your question specifically, it was the online survey that was the result. Just going back to the medical center, if I might, for just a moment, Mr. Mayor. When we see data or information where there's maybe a gap, where there's something that isn't done, the medical center definitely was one of the items that was identified. It didn't bubble up to the very top, but it was one that was identified. We made sure that it was in there under the community vitality piece, because we saw that it was important and that it had garnered some support. So when we went back to staff and said, hey, this is an item that we saw some support from the public, should we have something in here? The answer was yes, and it's reflected as the mayor's indicated on page 8. One other thing I might mention is that this document will help guide you, but it's also fluid, right? Things will change. You'll have to adjust. You'll have to keep your eye on how you're doing as you go. This is a guide to help you check in as you move forward, but there may be things that come up that weren't identified that maybe you can take advantage of, or maybe things change. If all of a sudden the government offers grant funding for medical centers, you're going to want to jump this one up a little bit sooner. So anyway, to answer your question, your project is on the list here on page 8.
Thanks, Rob. Other questions? Seeing none, again, thanks for guiding us, like I said, through this process, Rob. I know they aren't easy, and there's a lot of work to aggregate all the information into an actionable document that can, like you said, the intention is to guide us. It's not a, a piece by piece program, but it's just a sort of a vision, like you said, and I think we'll definitely make use of it and as best we can moving forward. So I appreciate all the work from yourself and your team, and I know staff had everyone had a good experience with the corporation and doing so. So thanks for working well with us and the community. We appreciate it. Motion to receive the presentation before us. Moved by Councillor Natchoff, seconded by Deputy Mayor Huntley. All in favor? That is approved. Next on the agenda is the minutes of the regular meeting held February 18th. Can I get a motion for those minutes to be approved as presented? Moved by Councillor Burns, seconded by Councillor Natchoff. All in favor? That is approved. Next, we have minutes from committees and boards. Bear with me. The Municipal Revitalization and Heritage Advisory Committee minutes from September 13th, October 28th, and December 20th. Looking for a mover and a seconder for approval of those as presented. Councillor Natchoff, Councillor Edgerton, all in favor? That is approved. Next, we have the Downtown VA meeting minutes of January 9th. Looking to receive those for information. Moved by Deputy Mayor Huntley, seconded by Councillor Byrne, all in favor? That is approved. Next on the agenda, we are in the reports section. Ms. Hurley, the CAO 2025-03 Corporate Strategic Plan.
Good afternoon, Council. The recommendation before me, or before you, excuse me, is that Council adopt the Corporate Strategic Plan 2025-2030 prepared by Town Hall Consulting. That is the recommendation. I think we've just heard the presentation, so I don't think I need to get into it, but I would like to thank everyone that did participate, Town Hall Consulting, staff, the community, and council, of course. I do support the document. It's a great document. I think it'll guide us. As we mentioned, it is a tool. It gives us a sense of direction, and I'm looking forward to working with the document over the next few years.
Thank you, Ms. Hurley. Any questions? If not, we're looking for a mover and a seconder to adopt the corporate strat plan prepared by Town Hall Consulting. That's the direction in the report. Any questions about the recommendation? If not, we'll look for a mover and a seconder in regards to that. Moved by Deputy Mayor Huntley, seconded by Councillor Natchoff. All in favor? That is approved. Thank you, Ms. Hurley, and thanks again, Rob. Thanks for making the trek out here to be here in person too. Next on the agenda is report 12.2, report fire station completion and revised lease agreement. Chief, I know you've been waiting for those words, so without further ado, over to you, sir.
Thanks, Mark. I got it. Technological challenges. Okay, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. The report before Council today is Fire Department Report 2025-02, Fire Station Completion and Revised Lease Agreement. There's 3 recommendations that Council received. Fire Department Report 2025-02 in regards to the final cost of the new fire station project. That Council execute the revised lease agreement for the between County of Peterborough and the Township of Cabot-Monaghan, and that Council sign the bylaw 2025-14 to authorize the execution of the lease agreement between the County of Peterborough and the Township of Cabot-Monaghan. So the report goes through. It starts off by, we are fully complete and operational as of January 8th. Both fire and EMS are operating out of it fully now. Council, it talks about the total budget the council approved of $8,089,510. And the total capital cost of the when the building was complete was $9,193,079, which is a deficit to the project of $1.1 million and $3,569. The report goes on to talk about the key factors that led to this deficit, which includes 3.3% inflation over the multi-year timeline, higher costs for labor, materials, and services. There also, the report talks about the constructability challenges that we ran into during the project. that resulted in extended work plans and extended timelines, resulting in delay claims from trades that were involved in the project. It talks about the expanded technological requirements for the networking system, and it talks about leaseholder improvements. In regards to the leaseholder improvements, that's the portion in the report talking about the new agreement with the updated basic rents portions of the agreement to cover those leaseholder improvements. And the report finally talks about some outstanding works that needs to be done. They're identified there, such as landscaping, asphalt between the two buildings, sidewalk railing, and the access to the furnace access for the furnace on the roof that's located on the roof. Those works that are to be completed are total 140,000. The outstanding works that I just mentioned are also included in the total project deficit. If there's any questions that council will have, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thanks, Chief. Thanks for the report. Questions, members of council? Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Through you, Chair. Again, not so much a question, Chief, but congratulations on getting us here. We all know it's been a long, hard road, and you've had to navigate many, many speed bumps. So glad we're here today. Looking forward to opening it.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor Huntley. Question, Councillor Byrne.
Through the chair to the fire chief. This is a pretty elaborate rental agreement, and I know we rent a lot of things to a lot of people as a township. It mentions in here, I'm not sure when I was reading through, is the paramedics supplied by the Peterborough County going to look after some of the taxes, some of the utilities, and some of the heating costs?
Through the mayor to Councillor Burns, that is correct. There's a percentage in the agreement that they're going to, all the operating costs will be totaled up, and they're paying a percentage of it. That percentage is 23% of all the operating costs on top of the basic rent. So basic rent is basic rent, and then there's operating costs. So as we work through that and find out what our true operating costs are, I'm going to be working with our Director of Finance to portion out those items that can be billed back to the County of Peterborough, and they will be done so in accordance with the agreement. I believe it's on a quarterly basis. We'll be doing those.
Thanks, Chief. Follow up?
Through the chair to Mr. Belfer. It also talks about how we can get out of the agreement. Our township could end it, terminate it, whatever. But I didn't see a lot of details about whether the tenant wanted to vacate. What I thought it was mentioned earlier meetings about a 90-day window or something. I didn't find it in here when I was going through how they could actually, or if there's a possibility for them to terminate this agreement somewhere along the line.
The agreement itself, it's an excellent question through the mayor to Councillor Burns. The agreement talks about those terminations should the need arise. It also talks about the costs that would be associated with terminating such an agreement. And then at the end of the agreement, there's at the end of the term, there's a section in there as well as to renegotiate it if things are working. And it's our hope that this will be a long-lasting agreement between our two services, and that we can have that it will continue on into the future for many, many years to come.
Yeah, I think it's hard to really predict because this is one of those entities that there's been so much provincial discussion about, who's responsible or who's going to be responsible for the various, the distribution, let's just call it that, of emergency services, specifically in ambulance. It's hard to predict. So it's until the world in regard to emergency services changes, we're kind of at the mercy of that, but we'll see what happens. Other questions? Councillor Brink.
Through the chair, back to Bill. It also talks about if the tenants did damage to this building, there's a bunch of clauses in there about that. If for some unforeseen reason, the building gets destroyed for whatever, I don't care. are we on the hook to supply the tenants with temporary accommodations while we're doing repairs or deciding what's going to happen next?
I would suspect that there's something in the agreement that talks about that. I'm not 100% sure about that. I think those are what you call, and I hate to, not to sound like a lawyer today, but force majeure circumstances, things that are out of your control, and that we would work together with that organization, much like we'd have to work internally here to find operations for our fire service.
Pretty good lawyer speak, chief. You've been on this project for a while, it seems, unfortunately. Other questions with regards to the report? No, if seeing none, I think it behooves us at this time, this was approved, or sorry, the updated lease agreement was approved by county council, so I think it warrants a thank you to the county for understanding. There's a lot of nuances to the funding model with which the county receives some funding to provide paramedicine services. Unfortunately, that doesn't come in the way of upfront capital for construction, so I think it's nice to. We obviously had to work with the county to ensure that we had a location for this facility where ambulance service could be expanded in the community, which I think is a thing that a lot of people are very much looking forward to when we saw the potential or the expected implications on response times in the township, which is great. But then also to work with us as a partner and renew the agreement at a revised and more true up cost for the facility is, I think it warrants an appreciation, or at least a comment about appreciation. So thanks for the county on that. Councillor Burke.
Through the chair, sorry about this. I should have mentioned it earlier. For the community's sake, there's a lot of feeling that the paramedics are going to be stationed there most of the time. Is that actually the case, or is that going to just be for a depot to them to work out of? How many hours of the day could the public expect that they'll actually be in this area? And I know that's only a guess.
It's my understanding, and since the building's open, they're fully running out of there now, 24 hours a day. And they're staffing that just because I believe when I came over to, I don't believe I know, when I came over to this council meeting, the truck's out on a call right now. But by the time I'm done the council meeting and come back, they may be back in the quarters. So when they're not seen in the base, it means that they're out providing service to this community.
Yeah, good point, chief. Thank you. Other questions? Seeing none, the three recommendations on the report are before us today. I can read them again if you like. So that council received the report, that council execute the attached revised lease agreement for the paramedic emergency services, and that council sign the bylaw number 2025-14 to authorize the execution of the lease agreement between the county and the township. Moved by Councillor Edgerton, seconded by Councillor Natchoff. All in favor? That is approved. Again, chief, thanks for all the hard work. We know it's been a challenge, but we've made it this far. So congratulations on all your hard work and thank you for it. Moving on, the next report, finance 20. Oh, sorry, excuse me. Kimberly has a technical issue, so we're going to take a brief recess to let her get queued up before we address the next report. So do we need, we'll take a brief recess. It's 5 minutes, I think, Kimberly, should be okay. Okay, 5-minute recess. Thank you. All right, recess is complete. I think all the misunderstandings, the changes actually to a later report. So Kimberly, let's get to this report, 2025-03 capital project financing options. Ms. Oh,
Thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you for the opportunity to make that change for the next report, but we'll continue with this one for now. So if council remembers back when the first report was brought in the fall with the IO loans, the council had approved a motion to not approve those bylaws and to look at alternative options, financing options. So we have done that. There's attachments in this report about some of the background and what we've done, but I just wanted to explain in a generalized format. We can walk through the report, but what we've done is we've consolidated into two separate loans, one being for the township capital portion and the other portion being the development charge loan portion. But we're speaking about all three projects inside each of these loans as a consolidated one piece. So we won't be speaking about Public Works by itself, Fire Hall by itself, or the Millbrook Depot by itself. So that's just for clarity at the very beginning. So that's why in the recommendations, there is a recommendation for the two consolidated loans, one for the township capital and one for the DCs. As we move down through the report, we know that we have an annual repayment limit. And as a reminder to council, that's an external indicator of what we cannot borrow or can borrow, our upper limit within a year. It is based on our own revenues, and it is published by the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing after we filed our FIR returns annually. So as noted before, we had approximately own revenue of 15 million with annual repayments permitted if you were to hit maximum capacity at 3.8 million. With the three debentures that are currently ongoing externally with IO in relation to water and wastewater, which does not affect the property tax rate, it's water, wastewater, and development charges only. We are using annual repayments of about $506,102. So based on that, our annual repayment limit available after you deduct that goes down from the 3.8 million to 3.3 million still available for external debentures. We looked at external, so the external loans are the three that I just spoke about, and they represent only 13% of the overall ARL limit, and we're well within fiscal responsibility, with repayments continuing over the next 13 years and then reducing again to 179,124 for the final 10 years, because some of the debentures will be paid in full by 2037 and the remainder by 2047. Internal loans, if we just move down a little bit, that's okay. So currently for an internal loan that's not external, it's not reported on the ARL. We basically have the one primary, which is the $2.4 million excess cost, capital cost at the time of the build of the CMCC. This was known when the tenders went out and we received a motion of council that we would utilize OLG revenues to offset that. This is before we had COVID and before the amounts were reduced. So although we thought it would be fully paid off by now, we still are extending another about 3 more years to get ourselves to, including this year, to 2027. With the annual repayments that are coming in, we believe that it'll be repaid by then. So that's managed internally, and we do use the OLG revenues for that purpose. Just for clarification, before we continue through the report, council always has complete discretion over any interest rate or length of term for any internal borrowing. That's not an external party that's providing an interest rate or a term. So what we've used in this report, if you recall back on the last report, for break-even point, it was around the 15-year mark. So it's one of the reasons why we decided to continue with the 15-year mark for this report. You can imagine that if we were to start giving you 5, 10, 15, 20, it would just complicate the report. So we were trying to keep it clear as possible. We don't have any other sources of internal or external debt other than what I've identified so far in this report. So for the financing options, we did speak with our consultants, Watson Associates, and also legal with Aird and Burles, just to take a look at were there any other options we weren't considering, other things that we could investigate. Like I said, on one of the attachments, there is a bit more background about what was or was not done, but we've summarized in this report to give them to you in key categories and what we're not recommending and then what we actually are recommending. So we're not recommending at this time to go external to Infrastructure Ontario because we believe based on the development charges and what's coming in the future, there's an opportunity here where we could borrow within and save the municipality some funding for the township portion of the loan. Not the DC portion, but for the township portion of the loan. So therefore, we're not recommending that one at this time. Whenever we do DCs, we review the 5-year, it's a 5-year term that we review, but there's a 10-year horizon. This information is always brought forward in all the previous revisions of development charges. We have to look at water, wastewater. We've always brought forward the debentures at that time as well. That will continue to happen. If there was ever a concern that was brought up through our DC review, we would bring this back before council. So at this point in time, we're saying for the next 5 years, we believe that we can make this work internally. If there were any problems at the end of that 5-year term, as we look forward, we would absolutely come back with another report. We do not recommend funding all capital reserves or capital projects through reserves. The reason is you would completely I want to say deflate, but diminish your reserves and not give you opportunity to use them for the purposes that they were set aside. There's also some obligatory reserves that we don't have control over, and we don't have the right to do that either. So we would definitely not recommend that. I can't even think of a consideration where we would recommend that, but that is not one of our recommendations. But just to put it on the table that was reviewed as well. And then although we can go out for external loan financing options, looking at Infrastructure Ontario, where we said we're not willing to do that, they have the lowest rates and ease for municipalities to get into debentures. Even with speaking with our legal consultants, they also recommended that if you were to go external, you would look at IO over external financing through Canadian financial institutions, banking institutions, et cetera. So that would be unfavorable because we would be then entering into even a higher agreement. Well, if we're not willing to go with IO at a lower interest rate, why would we go external for a higher interest rate? So we're also saying no to that as well. So when we're looking at the actual, what we are recommending, we've put on the table here 2 options. One, like I said initially, is the development charge portion, and then the other portion is the township portion. So I'm going to speak to them just individually. So when you're looking at the next table down, if we go a little bit further, you'll see the 3 projects all together total $13,161,972. And on this capital project funding chart, you can see what we're proposing. Now, the reserves, what we've pulled from asset replacement, OLGs, the fire capital infrastructure, and other, which was previous year's budgets, we still have a balance that's still unfunded. And it's the first 2 lines. So the growth development charge portion of just over $5 million and the township portion, which is $5.7 million. So those are the 2 key areas that we're looking to say, okay, how are we going to finance these as we move forward? Because we don't want to have to leave them like they are, which they are fully funded right now through our reserves. So recommendation number 1 is our development charge loan portion. So that's the $5 million, just over $5 million, $5,052,854. I'm showing the breakdown for each project, so you can see that it is consolidated, all 3 of them added together, but it is for the portion that relates to development charges, relates to growth. We have a maximum capacity there that we can use. That is what we're suggesting here. Then you ask, okay, what's the interest rate or the lending rate that we would provide? Because this is in-house, it's with us. Council has full control. Again, council makes the decision on what interest rate to use. But as a benchmark, the Bank of Canada's lending rate is 3.25%. Most lending institutions are 2.2% above that. So to be fair, when we go back with our development charges, if we're ever brought to court or anything, we've never have been, but if we were, we always have to make sure that we can justify and stand behind what we are providing. I think this is generous. It's providing a market benchmark out there to be used, but we're not overdoing it by going with the maximum 2.2% on top of it. So in all the calculations provided to date, we have suggested 3.25%. I'm recommending that to council, but again, it's your decision. So therefore, in the 2025 budget, when we were looking at this, originally it was 20 years with IO. It was a different interest rate, which was higher. We've come down on the interest rate to 3.25%. However, we've reduced the time frame down to that 15 years. So therefore, that's why there's a slight difference in what we carried in the budget for estimates and what's actually there if this were to be approved today. So again, it doesn't affect the tax rate for this particular piece because it is the development charge piece. But what we're saying is we did have in the budget $375,704 to be paid through development charges annually for this particular type of debenture, and the calculated repayments would be $426,100 per year over the 15-year term. That again doesn't affect the property tax rate. The next section, this is the portion that relates to the property taxes. It's the $5.7 million. $5,775,021. This is the non-growth component that we cannot include in the development charges. So we're suggesting, because this is internally financing ourselves, and it does affect our municipal tax rate, then we would like to go to one of the lower ends, because who we're charging is who we're also getting the revenue from. So it would just make sense to reduce that down to something at a lower rate, which we thought would match to the CPI index. At the time of this report, it's a one-year average of 1.9%. So for the calculations, we're using the same 15 years, but instead of using the 3.25% Bank of Canada rate, we're suggesting 1.9%. You'll see there the three projects. Again, it's a consolidated loan of $5.7 million, but there's the three projects and what's not funded to date on that yet. This does affect the property tax rate. Sorry, there you go. So the loan repayments we had in the budget for all three projects were estimated at $348,073 net. The repayments using the 1.9 in the 15 years would bring it to $442,769 over the 15-year term. However, as discussed earlier, there is an ambulance lease for the capital component, which was just increased because of some of the additional costs that were there as well. So therefore, with that in consideration as well, to reduce the debenture payment, it actually adds to $385,826. So it's slightly up from the 348 that we had in the budget. And this represents overall 3.29% of the annual municipal tax levy. It's not an increase to, we already have it within, but I'm just saying 3.29% of our annual tax levy would go to debenture payments. CCBF. This is for consideration of council. I have included it here in the calculations, but because fire station number one, or fire stations were included as an additional opportunity under the CCBF reserve, not for the other projects, not for the other builds, but specifically for fire stations, it is an eligible category. And so we're suggesting to utilize $369,550 from that fund that we currently have in the reserves, and to use that towards this eligible project, which is fully doable. And so therefore that would reduce the $5.7 million loan that we were just speaking of internally for the township capital loan down to $5.4 million. And there's a small chart there at the bottom. If you look at the budget, what we budgeted, the 378 minus the ambulance, the original ambulance lease, 47,700, came to a net 330. If we don't, so WO being without, so we don't include the CCBF grant, it would cause it to be 442,000 less the 56,943, which is the new ambulance lease that was recently passed at the county last meeting. And it would bring our debenture payments annually to 385, which is that 3.29 I spoke about. However, with the CCBF, it would be 414,436 minus the 56,943, bringing it down to $357,493 if council were to decide. That's another option on the table. So both calculations are there for your consideration. So that brings me to the end of the report. There are background details available there as well, but just wanted to go over a summary of why we're doing what we're doing and what we're suggesting and the terms we're using. Thank you.
Thanks, Kimberly. Obviously, this is a very complicated report with a lot of moving pieces and a lot of different options to flush out, but I think you've done an excellent job of giving us, sort of broad framework to work within and make those ultimate decisions, like you said. So definitely fulfilled what council was asking for with sending back the previous report with IL. Obviously, it seems like there's a few options for us to consider that accrue far less interest over time, which is obviously a benefit. Questions, members of council, with regards to the report? Councilor Byrne.
Through the chair to Ms. Pope. One of the things I was trying to rationalize and figure out the formula that you use to come up with what portion of each project becomes eligible for DC revenue rather than having to be paid from the tax base.
Thank you. Through the mayor to council. That's a really great question. It's not within our jurisdiction to just select something out of nowhere. So during the development charges process, when we have the experts at the table, we include the maximum amounts of the estimates at the time of that report. So that's the maximum that I can pull here. You also have to have invested over the last 10 to 15 years at a certain level, or you end up getting capped as well. So with all the experts at the table, we look at that and we put that into place. So that is our guide, and that's what we've drawn down for what can and cannot be used. At the next 5 year, which is this year, development charge renewal, we'll look at a full 10-year horizon again. We'll have the 5-year lookout. We'll know where our maximums are. We'll know the estimates of future projects. It's ongoing, and that's how it's worked out. And that's what sets what a developer pays. So the rates that are in place on our development charges is how that's accrued. So it's always a 10-year horizon, 5-year lock in. This is what we can do. This is where we max out. We may want to do more. We may put more on as the estimated value, but we end up hitting our cap horizon. So we're not always able to put in the max that we would like. It's depending on the rules and regulations with the Development Charges Act. So that's not really an internal document that we adjust or can just pick numbers from. We have to follow the legislation. And so all we've done here is we've taken the maximum allowable amount that was within our DCs when we did go through that process and apply it here.
Yeah, thanks. Questions? Follow, Councilor Byrne?
Through the chair to Ms. Pope again. So these development charges are expected. They haven't arrived per se. If the economy takes a dump and the future development doesn't happen the schedule that we're hoping, or some people are hoping anyways, how does that impact this loan arrangement?
Through the mayor to council. So it does, but it's not immediate, but it definitely does. So what happens is at that time when we're doing the reviews, so this year we're doing the review and we look at that 5 and 10-year horizon, we start with our beginning base though. Are we at a deficit or a revenue surplus from the estimates from the last report? So that's the very beginning of this. And then we may move forward. So if we were at a deficit, that deficit is added into the DCs as we move forward on the rates. If we're at a surplus, then we don't have to raise as much. So it reduces the DCs. So it's always looked at on a 5-year horizon. So the deficit or the surplus is always part of, it never carries past. It's just what's actually occurred. Did we hit our targets? Did we not? Are we over or are we under?
So just so I think I have a clear understanding, maybe just to communicate it a different way, and I'm more concerned that I've got it figured out because DC charges is a very complicated entity. To Councillor Byrne's question, if there isn't, let's just use the placeholder of like $400,000 that we could in DC revenues that are eligible to be put toward the payment for the DC loan. In essence, what happens is there just isn't that amount to paid and the loan period stays the same. But when we update it after the 5-year term, it would be reflected to say, actually, the DC payments are going to be increased once that money shows up. And on the counter side, if we get an influx, because DCs come, with the density requirements and the planning legislation now, you're getting, hundreds or 50 unit, sections of housing going on at once, and those development charges come in a big chunk, $5 to $10 million. Is the intention to only take that portion that we're scheduling, like the 400,000? I'm just going to round for the sake of placeholder. Are we only going to take 400,000 of that DC influx if we get the $2 million or however many $1 million in a year? Or as long as, and I know there's lots of nuances with how you can attribute it, but if we didn't have any other DC expenses for other departments or other avenues for that money, would it be foreseeable that there would be larger payments in an annual year when we have an influx of DCs? Or would it be held to the schedule that only the amount of the, like I said, a placeholder rounding to 400,000 would be applied in a year, and the rest would go to the various divisions within the DC revenue or accounts that you need to maintain?
Thank you through the mayor to all of council. Really great questions. And I think I understand the approach that you're looking for. So if I could say it this way, is that we're presenting a 15-year term with the intention, the hopeful intention that it doesn't have to change, that our estimates are relatively close and what actually happens in reality is relatively close. So that's the intention. However, when we get to the end, and we don't intend to change it. So once we go with the 5 years, we're going to stay with the 5 years until we revisit. When we revisit the development charges, if it looks like we're extremely under or we're extremely over, we would compensate at that time. But if we're within a realm of acceptable variance, we wouldn't. We would continue throughout the process. So the intention is that loan would sit for the 5-year periods, a revisit, another 5-year period revisit, and then the final 5-year period. If there's a windfall and something strange happens and suddenly there's all this, development charge funds coming in crazy quick, and we can suggest to council, say, hey, look, this is the situation. We can actually take this right off the books right now and pay it off right now. We can bring back that report. And that's where I was talking about. We would come back to council, but it's kind of a bit of a crystal ball scenario. I don't know what the future holds. I can only tell you what the estimates are in that place. If does that answer that part of the question?
Yeah, I think it does. I think the only other kind of question that was alluding to is, so if in the presence of that windfall scenario, or like a big influx of a larger development and all the DC revenues coming in, with establishing the rate, like I said, we haven't yet, but the 3.25, that forecasts, and the issues that we have with IO is that they do that and they lock you in because they're banking on accumulating that fixed amount of interest over the 30, 20 years or whatever, so that informs how they loan out to other municipalities. Different when you're internally managing that same sort of loan arrangement, right? So I guess my question is, with the DC portion, because that DC percentage is, again, being added to development charges, so it's, which makes sense. They're covering the cost of the municipality providing the loan in the absence of that money. If we have that windfall scenario with some of the developments, whether they're going forward in the next 5, 10 years or so, are we going to lose out on that total interest over if we pay it off early? And then, but I guess we'll be making it because the reserves will be replenished that we took from. But I just wanted to know if there's some sort of, if we're held to that same total amount of interest that we're, kind of propping up in the interim, or that will just vanish once the payments come in fast and furious.
Through you, Mayor to Council, yes, we would, if there was a repayment, we're not trying to bank on bringing in the revenue of 3.25% over 15 years. They're in 5-year increments. So we do plan to bank on it for the next 5 years, 100%. It'll be built into the new DC charges that we'll bring forward towards you this year. So yes, we're banking on 5 years of it. We'll revisit it again. If the loan still exists, we'll bank on the next 5 years to come in as well. Let's say we get to year 10 and there's the windfall and we're saying, okay, pay it off. You're not paying it off plus penalties. You're just paying it off for the value, and we forego that 3.25% at that point in time. Does that explain it? Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Pope. Other questions, members of council? Councilor Byrne?
Yeah, through the chair, I was more worried about a downfall than a surplus. When I'm looking at this stuff, it makes sense to borrow against our own money. Am I okay with guessing that all our reserves, if we're not using them, they're usually in an investment vehicle of some sort that we talked of earlier that pays a little over 3% normally, depending on how the market shifts. But we've already tapped into the reserves for buying, the $2 million in Tinney property down in Millbrook and the 116 acres out by the airport, about over $1 million. And I'm guessing from what I read that we've already spent the reserves to pay off these 3 capital projects that are now basically complete. So for that duration of the last couple of years, all that expenditure has been taken out of the investment vehicle. We're not making any investment income from it, and we're only hoping to start moving forward from this point to pay ourselves back some of the interest that we're already losing because it's not invested.
Thank you through you, Mayor, to Council. You are correct. Instead of externally financing the capital works or the capital build, we did do that with water wastewater. We felt that we could do that in-house and keep the costs a little bit lower. So we did self-finance internally. You'll notice on the reserve reports that you see each year that development charges always goes into a negative when you're dealing with roads and in the ground infrastructure, because you have to have those things in place for the growth to happen. So that's normal in DCs. And then as the funds come in, you'll see it replenishes the funds. They'll begin to build up. Even when you talk about if there is a windfall, there's that deficit has already drawn down on some of those dollars. We need to make sure that they go there first. We don't overspend most often when we're borrowing because there's a lot of obligatory or requirements in some of our funds. If they're set by council, yes, you have some more choice, but when they're set by external bodies, you don't have the same amount of choice. So we don't really have a huge amount. Our asset replacement reserve would be our largest one that you can use to do that with. And that's why whenever a report comes to council, it's never to say, let's just take from the asset replacement reserve and never return it. It's take from it and then let's return it over X amount of years. So that's why we can borrow within, and that's what we continue to do.
Thanks, Ms. Pope. Follow-up question, Councilor Byrne?
Through the chair, back to Kimberly. This mention of the 1.9 as a CPI index number at current, we don't see that, even if it goes up and down over the next 15 years, we're not going to change this narrative in this agreement. It's just there for a benchmark today to figure out what's fair and what's reasonable and what looks good.
So through you, Mayor, to council. So you're right. It's a choice of council. We are using it as a benchmark. That is correct. But if you give approval today, it is what I'm going to include in the upcoming discussions for development charges, and it will lock us in for that 5-year term. Or unless, if some reason council were to turn around and say, you know what, we need a new development charge review done at the 3-year mark, not the 5-year mark. Whenever the revisit would occur, we would do it at that point in time. Normally, we review development charges at 5 years. So I'm anticipating once every 5 or 8 years to look at it.
Well, I think Councilor Byrne, if I don't mean to speak for him, was referring to the township capital portion. So the intention would be, we would mirror those two rates for the terms, that we would revisit both when we're redoing the DC bylaw for the DC portion. The 1.9 is going to be in place for the same sort of term. So they'll both be adjusted. Maybe you'll take it. I don't know whether you're proposing to take an average, over the 5-year history to get whatever the new 1.9 rate might be, but I think if I'm not mistaken, Councilor, you were talking about the township portion. So is that the intention, that we're going to match them up? And then, because I mean, for budget purposes, it does matter if we're going to see an increasing number or expect that same payment over time.
Through you, Mayor, that's correct. So in the budget as well as the DCs, I would absolutely keep that 1.9%. I just meant our revisiting would be around that same period of time regardless, and that way we could forecast out future budgets as well.
So thank you for that. One question I had, and it didn't come to me until now in this discussion. If the 5-year horizon, are we going to get into an issue? And I know that's, the routinely updating the DC bylaw, but are we going to have an issue with the next iteration of council, that being a lame duck decision with regards to the final year of the budget? If we have 1.5 or 1 and change years left on this term, we're going to do the DC bylaw, but would that fall on the 4th year of the next term? Because I just worry about making those fiscal decisions, maybe I'm over worrying about something that doesn't really matter, but when I'm thinking 5 years, I'm like, well, it kind of might be in a not so convenient time to make those sorts of decisions. And there might be pressure from the council of that future day to make a potentially punitive decision for the sake of lowering a levy impact in 1 year versus sustaining the financial or fiduciary responsibility and committing to paying off those internal debts, over the period, which is the intention kind of in the report.
Through you, Mayor, to council, I can speak to the period of time since I've been here, and only once have we called it early, and it was because our water wastewater development charges were significantly lower than comparator municipalities. And so with council's direction, we were asked to go and do our review. I forget if it's 1 or 2 years earlier, but we did do it once. Usually there's a market reason why we would, but we wouldn't just choose to do, that's a huge amount of work. We wouldn't just choose to do it for no reason.
It's the future problem anyway, so we'll get through today's problems first, maybe. Other questions over the council? Councilor Byrne.
Through the chair back to Kimberly, could you refresh my memory? So this Community Capital Budget Fund, CCBM, the original intent that we've had for the past while, what was that earmarked for that we're going to pull out of?
I'm just going on my memory here, but the Public Works Director, I believe this particular project was it slurry seal and roads on this one? Yeah. Slurry treatment. Okay. And so, and this is the old federal gas tax, right? So it was renamed. So you've consistently seen it in budgets year after year, and then they changed the name. We have to apply every year with the federal gas tax fund, tell them what we intend to spend it on, what our budget is. And then at the end of the year, we have to file what we actually did do with the funds. And if there are any funds carried forward, what amount is there? So that's been ongoing. And if you remember during COVID, and sorry, it's just not right at the top of my head the year, but there was an additional 1-year payout. So it caused a little bit of a surplus in the account because we did not know about it at the time for our regular annual budgeting, but it was additional funds that came in. Fantastic for the municipality, but then we were kind of on a bit of a catch up to say, where are we spending those dollars? And that's why some of those dollars still remain today. On occasion, when we have a project come in a little bit under budget, we don't need the full funds. We only pull the funds when we need them and we can prove we spent it on that project. So sometimes that will happen too, where there's efficiencies and we don't need it all that year. And so then it stays in the reserve. But that's the historic. It's always usually been Public Works, but like I said, they brought out a new category for fire stations. It was quite interesting because when we first saw the category come out, I think it was around the time we were doing the CMCC build, and we thought maybe we could get funds for that. Well, we were told no. It's not for that particular project. So this was a new opportunity that came up, and then we thought, well, it might come in handy for us in the future when we look towards our firehouse.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken too, Kimberly, I think the year that we had this additional funds that we weren't kind of sure about was also the year that we didn't have the forecast. Like I think we get the 5-year increments, and the year that we realized we were going to have the surplus with the alternative source of funding was the year we hadn't heard yet what the next 5-year funding was going to look like. And because that's an annual thing that's been a part of municipal budgets for a long time, when you don't know if it's coming tomorrow, you can't really bank on it being there. So there was a pause, which led to this surplus or this additional monies in the reserve of 330 or 369,000 or so. But and now this change has allowed us to allocate it to that project as well. So okay, I thought that was a bit of the confusion as to why the money's still there, because we usually traditionally try to spend all of it in a year, knowing when we have that 5-year horizon. Okay, thank you for that. Councilor Byrne, question.
Through the chair back to Kimberly and maybe to Wayne. So if we pull this out of that fund with this acknowledgement today, that's not going to impact the slurry sealer we had planned this coming year for the pavement or the hardtop we put down last year. It's not going to impact that at all, correct?
Yeah, the present program, surface treatment and slurry seal is presently funded. This was surplus funds, so it is in addition to, but we do have funds available for both programs.
Thanks, Wayne. Questions, members of the council? Councilor Byrne?
Promise this is going to be the last, I think. On page 157, it mentions the MMAH fund or whatever you want to call it. And it mentions in it, not a tool for generating revenue. And that confused me. What would be the concept there?
I'm just looking at the specific part of the report that you're referring to. So under MMAH and Okay. So through you to all of council, we don't use debt. So you don't go out to debt to bring it in and treat it as if the debt is revenue to the municipality. So you wouldn't go out and get $100,000 loan and then call that $100,000 revenue to the municipality when you bring it in. That's what it's meant. So you don't use debt as false revenue, which we never would do, but that's part of the MMAH.
Thanks, Kimberly. Okay, so there's a few items for discussion. Obviously, there's two recommendations. I think one of the components that's not, that it impacts the total numbers in the recommendations, but isn't a part of the recommendation itself, is utilizing that CCBF monies that we are now conveniently and thankfully able to utilize towards this project. So I think, is there any questions about whether or not to do that? Like I said, it was left aside at the budget for the, so it hasn't been spent. It doesn't affect this year's plan. We have I think we're in year 2 of the 5-year forecast, so we know what the revenues are going to be for the next, 4 years, including this year. Is anyone against utilizing that CCBF funds? Doesn't seem like it. Okay. All right. So that's an internal discussion that we know the numbers that we're dealing with now because that money's in there. So rather than go through the 3 options, Kimberly, we can go through the 2. Is there any questions, any further questions? Let's do the DC portion first. Is there any questions about the DC portions or the rate and the term? Because at the end of the day, the financing, the rate and term are really the decisions that we have to make. So if there's a discussion, I think it makes sense to break it down that way. Let's talk about the DC rate and term. Councilor Byrne, question or comment?
Through the chair, I think Kimberly's already touched on that. We're going to look at this in some periods through the 15-year cycle, and everything's going to vary on that. I don't have an issue with that. And I actually think it makes a whole lot more sense that, yes, we're losing a little bit of income on not having this source of revenue invested, but we're not paying somebody else the premium. We're actually trying to give something back to the taxpayer. So that kind of makes a lot of sense to me. It's unfortunate we're in this much debt, but that seems like a better course of action for me.
Other questions? Deputy Mayor Huntley?
Through you, Chair, I guess it's not so much a question, but I believe it's the right course. I think 15 years is the right term. That gives us a couple of chances to revisit it over the term of that loan. We're the loan holder, so we can negotiate with ourselves probably a lot easier than we could anybody else. And I think the 3.25 is very justifiable in case it ever gets challenged by the development community. So we can defend it from a challenge. So I think it's the right course of action.
Yeah, and Kimberly, maybe you can provide some context on this too. These sorts of projects, I think, kind of represent the closing of a chapter, and it's the capital assets pre-asset replacement reserve. Because since that legislation has now come into place, all 3 assets had fully depreciated any value at the time of their reconstruction. So there was no asset replacement monies accumulated for either of these 3 projects because they had fully depreciated beyond recovery. So in the future, even including these same projects, they are going to be accounted for in our asset replacement reserve that we'll be saving towards as we continue to move forward. So is that a true statement that these are the last main, I mean, I'm sure there's still other things that have a portion of it, but that wasn't fully depreciated. But if I'm not mistaken, the 3 replacement or the 3 facilities that have been replaced had 0 asset replacement monies attributed to them because of the fully depreciation of those facilities. Is that right?
Through you to all of council, that's correct. If we go to page, I think it's 2 or 3 down in that summary with the 13 million of the projects right there. And so the asset replacement reserve transfer, you'll see a small portion, just over 7,000 for fire station and 22,000 for public works. So we did have a tiny bit that was in here, but it was very, very small. So you are correct. If we were a fully funded municipality, which no municipality is, back in 2008, when they first brought in assets and we had the funding set aside, in essence, if you set aside enough money for your assets when you're using them each year, by the time you go to purchase them, you can purchase them from the reserves. But no municipality even knew what assets they had back in 2008. So when it started with a first $200,000 deposit, and we moved forward and we're thinking of how can we possibly get funding in here, we said, okay, what is that calculation that says our annual use? That's our depreciation. So depreciation, though, is on assets that are still yet to be depreciated. If they're fully depreciated, you've owned it for 80 years and it was on a track of 40-year depreciation. Well, once you hit year 40, it's fully depreciated. It's not depreciating over and over and over again. You're done until the next time you buy it or replace it. So whether it be a vehicle or a building. So when you're looking at the overall term, right now, what we've been doing at this municipality is we have a depreciation value that we bring forward to council every year to say, okay, can we get this amount of funds through the municipal tax rate to replenish what we physically used in the current year that we can identify on the FIR? But we know there are assets that have not been, and we also know that we're not a fully funded, but we're in a fantastic position as a municipality. That's not a negative thing, but there are other municipalities that can't do what we're doing. They can't do internal financing. And so some of that is because of what we have been able to do through our asset replacement program.
Yeah, it was just specifically to the comment about debt. I mean, you have to incur this debt because it hasn't been captured historically in saving towards the eventual replacement, unfortunately. So now that we have that system in place, we'll have to continue, hopefully future councils continue to robustly support and invest in it so that we have the opportunity to do this sort of thing. Excellent. Thank you for that. Other questions? If not, we can go to the recommendations in the report. Just scrolling up, bear with me. The council approve internal borrowing of $5,052,845 from the asset replacement reserve for the Parks and Public Works Depot, Public Works Operations Center, and Fire Station for the growth-related DC charge loan at the Bank of Canada lending rate of 3.25% over a 15-year term, and the council approve internal borrowing of $5,775,021 from the asset replacement reserve for the Parks and Public Works Depot, Public Works Operations Center, and Fire Station for the non-growth related township capital loan at consumer price index rate of 1.9% over the 15-year term. Ms. Pope?
And just one caveat, if you do want to apply the CCBF, there needs to be a change to the total number. Okay.
Instead of the 5.7, do you have that total number? I have it written down somewhere, but it's just in the report, because we can scroll down to that number just so I read it correctly. No. So the 5 million, I think it's 5.4 or something, right? 5.4. Okay, so then I'll read that second recommendation again. The council approve internal borrowing of $5,400,005.471. Okay, I got that before it was we scrolled away from the asset replacement reserve for the Public Works, Parks and Public Works Depot, Public Works Operations Center, and Fire Station for the non-growth related township capital loan at the consumer price index of 1.9% over a 15-year term. And again, a mover and a seconder for those recommendations. Moved by Deputy Mayor Huntley, seconded by Councillor Edgerton. All in favor? Oh, recorded vote. Excuse me, I forgot. Deputy Mayor asked me for a recorded vote on this. Ms. Page, over to you.
Councillor Natchoff,
Yes.
Councillor Edgerton,
Yes.
Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Byrne,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you, council. I think it's great that we're all on the same page with regards to this. I think, thank you, staff and Ms. Pope, for doing all the additional work. I see your hand raised, so that means there's more to say about this.
I would just, because I know you're verbally doing that in the report, but just authorization to take those funds from the CCBF fund in a motion, so it's very clear that it's being taken from there to compensate for that difference.
We're good. Through yourself, Mr. Mayor, to Ms. Pope, as long as the mover and seconder are okay with that, we can make the amendment to this motion, and we'll just clarify the language.
Thank you for that, Ms. Page. I think we'll allow you to do that. And mover and seconder, obviously, okay? You're good with that, Councillor Edgerton? Yep. Okay, perfect. Very good. Well, thank you again for that. We'll move on in the next report. Finance 2025-04 2024 Statement of Council Remuneration. And this was the report in question that had a small error that you've now fixed, Ms. Pope, I believe. Do we need a motion of council to receive the adjusted to add the new and revised report. Counselor Byrne, seconded by Deputy Mayor Huntley. All in favor? That is approved. Okay, now let's see this freshly updated, hot off the press report, Ms. Pope.
Thank you, through you, Mayor, to all of council. I appreciate your patience. The primary change here was attachment number 1. Although the GL was accurate as far as the total value, it was assigned to Councillor Nelson instead of Ryan Huntley for the seminar conferences. So if we could go to attachment 1 and I can show the change there. So the original one that was posted that was incorrect had under Nelson, Councillor Nelson Edgerton, seminars, conferences and expenses, 681.79. You'll notice now Councillor Nelson Edgerton is down to 0 and Deputy Mayor Ryan Huntley has increased by the 681.79. That is the change that was brought forward. Everything else remains the same, and this is the standard 2024 statement of remuneration. It shows the amount of wages, benefits, and expenditures paid on behalf of the municipality for each council member, and also the boards and authorities in the bottom section there as well, which has been reported to us.
Thanks, Ms. Pope. Any questions? If not, we're just receiving the statement for just receiving the report. Moved by Councillor Burns, seconded by Councillor Natchoff. All in favor? That is approved. Looks like your budget cleared up now, Councillor Edgerton. Everything's right where it should be. Good, 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 good. Happy to hear it. Next is report Public Works 2025-03 acquisition and dedication of parts 1 and 2 45R-17724 as part of public road allowance. Wallace Line. Wayne.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to council, the 3 recommendations before you are: number 1, that council approve the acquisition of part 1 and 2 of Plan 45R-17724 as part of the public road allowance for Falls Line at the total price of $5,000. Recommendation number 2 is that council dedicate this portion of Falls Line, which is parts 1 and 2, 45R-17724 as public road allowance after the purchase is finalized. And recommendation number 3 is that the mayor and clerk be authorized to execute bylaw number 2025-15, being a bylaw to dedicate parts 1 and 2 on Plan 45R-17724 as part of the public road allowance for Falls Line after the purchase is finalized. And just a note for council that this piece of road widening, as we refer to it, is shown on the reference plan, but it is a road widening of 3 meters along the existing property on the north side of Falls Line. And we have carried for a number of years a development charge on both road widening and widening of the physical road on Falls Line. So there is a dedicated development charge to this, which these funds will come from. So if there are any questions, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hancock. So for clarity, they're purchasing the small portion of land so that we can align the infrastructure accordingly, and that's fairly much it. Okay. Questions, members of council? Councillor Byrne.
Through the chair to Wayne, from what you just said, can I accept the fact that there's enough in that DC charge to pay for the purchase and all the legal and paperwork side of it, which is just drives me nuts that it's more substantial than the cost of the actual land? But will those charges, that'll cover the total sum, taxes and all in?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Byrne, there is funds available in development charge to pay for this. And I do agree the cost of the legal survey and legal charges are more than the property, but it is what it is. So, and thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. Other questions with regards to the report? If not, there are 3 recommendations that council approve the acquisition of part 1 and 2 for the total price of $5,000, that council dedicate this portion of Hollis Line, part 1 and 2, as a public road allowance after the purchase is finalized, and that the mayor and the clerk be authorized to execute bylaw number 2025-15, being a bylaw to dedicate parts 1 and 2 on Plan 45R-17724 as part of the public road allowance for Hollis Line after the purchase is finalized. Moved by Councillor Edgerton, second by Deputy Mayor Huntley. All in favor? That is approved. Thank you, Mr. Hancock. Next on the agenda is report PEB 25-06 2024 CIP recipient second intake. Bridget, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Graham. The report before council is PEB 2025-06 with the following recommendations: that council accept the proposed 2024 Community Improvement Plan grant recipient, St. Paul's Cemetery and Chapel. It's a second intake as presented, and $3,000 be allocated from the Community Improvement Plan incentives capital budget. And the second recommendation is that applications be received on a first come, first served basis to the limit of the available funding for this year.
Perfect. Nice to see that we've got an application for the second intake, and hopefully they'll, well, it looks like the educational signage and display and the panels, et cetera, it looks like it'll be a great improvement to the church and cemetery there. So excellent. Councilor Byrne, question?
Through the chair to Bridget. So from what you just told me, upcoming years, the first one to apply will possibly get the lion's share, rather than, and sometimes we've had 3 or 4 or 5 intake ideas to look at, but this first come, first served basis. So the fellow that doesn't get to the trough early enough might not be anything left.
Through your chair to Councilor Byrne, not necessarily. There are limits to each of the funding programs. They are capped at the amount that they can receive. So for example, the facade and signage improvement is $10,000 or $8,000. It's $10,000 if you are considered a priority site. But the applicant has to, it's a 50% contribution. So the applicant has to spend 16,000 in order to get the 8,000. So if it's a really good project and it's eligible, then yes, absolutely. They could, the first come could get a large portion, but not necessarily.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, and Bridget, on that line, like you said, for each of the various programs, there is an established limit. So, I mean, unless, and I don't think any of them are eligible for a 25,000 or the total year budget for the program at all. So at least, so yeah, there will be potentially some competition if there's a few larger ones that come in earlier, but like not, they can't all be, there can't be one recipient of the total amount. Unless I guess there is a potential that they could have 3 different applications for 3 different components, or maybe speak to that.
Through you, Chair, to you, Chair. 100% probably should have clarified that there is a cap that that you can apply. I think it's about $15,000 is the most you can get, regardless of how many applications you put in.
Thanks for that. Other questions, Deputy Mayor Huntley?
Through you, Chair. There's mention that there was another application that didn't meet the qualifications. Is it an application that could be reworked to meet the qualifications, or is it so they could come back at a later time, or is it just they're not going to meet it no matter what?
Through you, Chair, to Deputy Mayor Huntley, we're actually working with the applicant to try and see if we can get their application to a stage where we can bring it before council and recommend approval.
Councilor Byrne.
Through the chair to Bridget, is there a motivation for this idea of going first come, first serve as compared to, and then once somebody has got acclaimed, whatever they're going to get, whatever that matter be, that would be brought to council at that moment. And then as the year progressed, anything else that came up would come up in each increment.
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Byrne. To answer your first question, we are recommending the change because it allows for greater accessibility to the program. Applicants aren't tied to a deadline, which may not meet their budgeting timelines. So sometimes they may have a project that comes up mid-year and they kind of want to run with it right away. And if there's funding available to them and they're eligible, then we are able to respond quickly. As an economic development officer, I often meet with local businesses who are embarking on a project where the CIP would be a really good fit. And it's a great project, it's a great contribution to the community, but because it's been tied to a deadline, I haven't been able to recommend it. So it allows me to use it a little bit better as an economic development tool, which is kind of the intent of the program. And absolutely, the downside is, yeah, you'll probably see me come forward with a report every single time somebody comes forward with an application.
So the first come, first serve is more to have more freedom to address more time constraints for those applying for the various streams of programming. That's a fair summary?
Yeah, through you, Chair, to you, Chair. Sometimes it's just, they just don't have enough time to kind of get all their ducks in a row. So they unfortunately miss the funding, which is unfortunate if it's a really good project. We also want to be able to support it. So it gives them and us flexibility.
Thank you. Councilor Byrne?
Through the chair, back to Bridget, is there the option then? So somebody comes late to the party, the funds are already mainly depleted. They would qualify for a larger number, but there's no money left to give them that larger number, even though they qualified. Would they be able to resubmit the following capital or the calendar year for that investment and maybe make up that difference by being first to the trough next time?
100%. Yep.
Yeah, and we hope to get there. I think we've had maybe 1 year where we've been fully subscribed or fully allocated. There's usually a bit of a remainder, if I'm not mistaken. You got to speak to that, Bridget. That's okay. But we hope to get to that position where we are getting full uptake on all of the funds available. That's obviously the intention. So 2 recommendations in the report. That council accept the proposed 2024 CIP grant recipient, St. Paul Cemetery and Chapel, and in the second intake as presented, 3,000 be allocated from the Community Improvement Plan Incentives Capital Budget, and that the applications be received on a first come, first served basis to the limit of the available funding for the year. 2 recommendations moved by Councilor Byrne, seconded by Councilor Natchoff. All in favor? That is approved. Thank you, council. Next on the list is the Corporate Services 2025-04, the 174th Millbrook Fair Community Festival designation. Ms. Page.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To yourself and the rest of council, before you is the annual request from the Millbrook Fair. It's their 174th year. The only difference you will notice this year, they are not having the trackside or beer barn open for the Sunday event. It will only be on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Other than that, before you, it's for your consideration.
Nope. Looking forward to another great weekend at the fair, and happy to support and give them this designation to move forward. And obviously, we continue to work with the various fair boards with whatever they need. I know there's been years where we've had to do a lot of earth movement in order to facilitate the events, but we're very happy to support it moving forward. Any questions about that? If Councilor Byrne, question?
Through the chair to Ms. Page, right off the top, is there any thought put into the 175th that's coming up? And I would think that'd be a landmark that we should probably try to help. And I think we talked about it at a previous meeting about the road construction that might be done right out in front of the fairgrounds, that is going to be tried to not impact this year, and that's still the plan.
I'm not sure if Ms. Page or Mr. Hancock want to speak to that. Maybe Wayne, and then Cindy can clean up.
Through Mr. Mayor to Councilor Byrne. First of all, we are aware of the Millbrook Fair, and as with Main Street and the other projects in the area, we will work around the fair program. So we're ensure that traffic is, accessible to the fair from that roadway. So we will, we'll work to that schedule.
Is there anticipation of additional roadworks into the following year as well that might be potentially disruptive? Obviously, as Councilor Byrne mentioned, for the 175th, is there any anticipated development in the horizon on that roadworks, or we expect it to all be complete by then?
Through you to Mr. Mayor to council, I think, first of all, we always try to table a project in the area through the capital program. That would be subject to your approval for 2026. But we are trying to improve sewer water and storm drainage in that area. So it is our plans to bring projects forward through that capital program. I think we've been fair to deal with the fair on an ongoing basis.
No, absolutely. Thanks. We'll, again, we're getting ahead of ourselves yet again, but, so it doesn't hurt to think ahead, that's for sure. Any other questions with regards to, the report? If not, the three recommendations, I believe we can just do them all in one collected thing. Moved by Deputy Mayor Huntley, seconded by Councilor Byrne, all in favor. That is approved. Last, council and verbal reports from any of the committees that you may have attended since the last meeting. Councilor Natchop.
Thank you, through you, Chair. With the GRCA, we just at our last meeting had our AGM. New president and vice were appointed and elected. The budget was passed, and then they did ask if I would continue on in my role as the representative from the board on the recreational users group, which I happily said that I would. Otherwise, yep, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Natchop. Any other committee reports? Councilor Byrne?
Through the chair, I'd just like to mention the fact that during March break coming up real soon, there's a bunch of free public skating and some other programs for public skating while the kids are off school. So the ones that don't watch the website might like to be aware of it.
Yep, and there's a nice shiny sign right up front there. Thank you, Ms. Hurley, for you getting that into utilization, and we're hoping to move that around maybe when there's not so much snow to overcome in different road allowances, but we'll look for that. Unfortunately, the library board meeting was canceled last time, so I don't have anything to report on that news. Any other reports? Seeing none, we need a mover and a seconder to receive those reports. Councilor Byrne and Deputy Mayor Huntley, all in favor? That is approved. There is no general business, no correspondence for information, no correspondence for action. The bylaws, being bylaw number 2025-13 zoning bylaw amendment 347 sharp line, and bylaw number 2025-14 being a bylaw to execute a revised lease agreement between the Township of Cappamonigan and the County of Peterborough, and bylaw number 2025-15 being a bylaw to dedicate as part of a public road allowance a portion of Hollis Line described as part of Lot 12 in Concession 6, Geographic Township of Cavan being parts 1 and 2, Plan 45R-17724, Township of Cappamonigan be read a first, second, third time and passed this third day of March, signed by the mayor and the clerk, and the corporate seal attached thereto, moved by Councilor Byrne, seconded by Councilor Natchop, all in favor. That is approved. There is no unfinished business. Any notices of motions? Seeing none. The confirming bylaw, bylaw number 2025-16, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the meeting held March 3rd, 2025, be read a first, second, and third time and passed this third day of March, signed by the mayor and the clerk, and the corporate seal attached thereto, moved by Councilor Byrne and Councilor Edgerton, all in favor. That is approved. Lastly, a motion to adjourn today's meeting, moved by Councilor Natchop, seconded by Councilor Edgerton, all in favor. That is also approved. There's a number of upcoming events, as was alluded to earlier by the chief. We're happy to announce that the grand opening of Fire Station is going to be held on March 8th. We're hoping for good weather on that day. The festivities are going to begin with some brief comments from myself and probably the chief, I'd imagine, at around 11 a.m. And then we'll have guided tours through the facility as well. The next Millbrook Downtown BIA Board of Management meeting is Thursday, March 13th. The regular council meeting, or the next regular council meeting, is Monday, March 17th at 1 p.m. in the chamber. The next public library board meeting is Tuesday, March 18th at 7 p.m. at the Millbrook branch. And the Municipal Revitalization and Heritage Advisory Committee meeting is Thursday, March 20th at 9 a.m. Sustainability Advisory Committee, I don't believe is going to be meeting on the 27th. Actually, that's an update. And then our subsequent regular council meeting is Monday, April 7th at 1 p.m. Thank you everyone for joining in, and see you next time.